Summer camp at Redwood Pines was supposed to be the best 2 weeks of their lives. The isolated, forested retreat was famous for its hiking trails, late-night bonfires, and the eerie folklore passed down through generations of campers. But for a group of 6 17-year-olds, this summer would be a nightmare they would never forget, if they managed to survive. Day 1. The Whispering Woods. The camp's head counselor, Mr. Graves, was an imposing man with a weathered face and a voice like rustling dead leaves. He led the new arrivals through the usual orientation, warning them about staying inside after dark. "The woods have a way of keeping secrets," he muttered before sending them to their cabins. Chris, Amy, Jack, Sam, Lisa, and Jordan were inseparable. They had planned for this trip all year. That night, gathered around the fire, they exchanged ghost stories, laughter echoing through the still trees. The fire cast flickering shadows, distorting their faces into twisted masks. Then the first scream tore through the night. It was distant but blood-curdling. A long, high-pitched wail that made their skin crawl. Every counselor sprang into action, searching the camp, but they found nothing. No missing campers, no sign of distress. Just silence. "Probably some animal," Lisa reasoned, but her voice trembled. The group went to bed uneasy, locking their cabin doors. Outside, the trees rustled even though there was no wind. Day 2. The first vanishing. The next morning, the camp was buzzing with rumors. A kid named Trevor had disappeared overnight. His belongings remained untouched, his bed made. Nobody had seen anything, only heard the scream. The counselors insisted he had just run away, but something about it felt wrong. His parents were contacted, but no one could explain his disappearance. Some of the younger campers started crying, and the counselors tried their best to calm them down. That afternoon, the group went canoeing on Redwood Pines Lake. The water was still, almost too still. A thick layer of fog hovered over the surface. Jack, always the jokester, tried to lighten the mood. "Maybe the lake ate him," he laughed, tapping his paddle against the water. Then Amy screamed. They turned just in time to see Sam's canoe flip. The boat rocked violently as if something unseen had grabbed it. Sam thrashed in the water, screaming in pure terror. His face twisted in agony. Then silence. The water stilled. Sam was gone. Not a ripple remained. The group paddled frantically to the spot, but there was nothing. No bubbles. No body. They called out his name, but the only response was the eerie stillness of the lake. When they reported it, the counselors searched the entire lake. Hours passed. Still nothing. Mr. Graves merely shook his head. "Sometimes the woods take what they want," he muttered, turning away. Day 3. Shadows in the dark. The grief was unbearable, but fear took precedence. The group refused to be separated. That night, they barricaded their cabin and took turns keeping watch. The air inside the cabin was thick with unease, and every creak of the wood sent their hearts racing. At 3 a.m., Jordan nudged Chris awake. "I saw something," he whispered. Chris peered out the window. The moonlight cast long shadows, but then, a shape moved. A tall, inhuman silhouette, barely distinguishable from the trees. It didn't move like a person. It stood unnaturally still, its elongated form blending into the night. Then Lisa shrieked. They spun around. Lisa was gone. The door hadn't opened. The windows were shut. But her bed was empty, the sheets still warm. A lingering whisper filled the air, almost like a sigh. Her screams still echoed in their ears. Day 4. The truth unveiled. Panic set in. The counselors refused to answer questions, brushing them off as hysteria. Mr. Graves, however, pulled them aside. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. "Redwood Pines isn't just any camp. It's a place of sacrifice." He explained the legend of the Hollow Man, a creature from the woods. It doesn't chase, doesn't hunt, only takes. It moves unseen, creeping into the world of the living just long enough to snatch its victims. No one ever sees it. Only the screams remain. Jordan refused to believe it. "You expect us to believe a damn ghost story?" But then Jack was taken. One moment he was beside them. The next, an agonizing scream filled the air, and he was gone. The only trace was his flashlight, still rolling on the ground. Chris picked it up, his hands trembling. The air around them had become unnaturally cold. They ran. They didn't know where, only that they had to leave the camp. But the deeper into the woods they went, the heavier the air became, as if something ancient and unseen pressed against them. The shadows seemed to shift, watching them. And then Chris heard Amy scream. He turned, too late. She was gone. The only sound left was the wind whispering through the trees as if mocking their terror. Day 5. The last one standing. Chris and Jordan made it back to the main lodge by sunrise. The camp was eerily quiet. No campers, no counselors. Just Mr. Graves sitting alone at the front steps, smoking a cigarette with hollow eyes. "It's too late," he murmured. "The Hollow Man has what he needs." Chris shook his head. "We need to get out of here." Mr. Graves gave them a sorrowful look. "You don't understand. You're already his." Jordan opened his mouth to argue, but his voice turned into a strangled cry. His hands clawed at his throat, and then he vanished. His scream rang through the lodge, reverberating off the wooden walls. Chris fell to his knees, heart hammering. He was alone. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Slow, deliberate. He turned, but there was nothing. Only darkness. The floor creaked beneath him. The air was thick, suffocating. A voice, barely a whisper, brushed against his ear. "You were always meant to stay." Chris felt something cold wrap around his wrist. Then the final scream echoed through the trees, and silence fell once more.